Welcome everybody to the LabKey Server Administration Training. This is a big 3-day event. And by the way, I'm Steve Hansen. I'm the Director of User Education. I'll be leading these training days. I'm also assisted by our marketing lead, Will Bazoki, and he's in the background. He's going to kind of help me field questions and whatnot. In any case, let's take a look at the agenda here. So today, I want to look at, basically do 3 topics. I want to look at kind of basics of the server, just kind of like, what is the server? What's the whole point of it? What's it do? And I also want to take a look at security and how to kind of control access to your data and your reports. But in between the two, I kind of want to do a little deep dive, kind of a little mini unit on data grids. So that's our agenda for today. But I also want to leave a lot of time for Q&A after all of these topics. And that's where you can use that chat feature in or the Q&A feature inside of Zoom here. Will, actually, what do you prefer? Is it Q&A better, I think? Use the Q&A feature, I think. And as we go, we'll call those out, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. Just a little preview, day 2, we're going to look at how to work with laboratory and assay data inside a LabKey server. And also look at data storage generally in the server. So we're going to look at how the database works and how files are stored in LabKey server. And I'll probably do I'm not sure, I'll do another little deep dive topic in there too. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Maybe the query browser, maybe queries. I'm not sure what. And then for day 3, Friday, we're going to take a look at how LabKey server can work with clinical data and look at reporting inside the server. And again, we'll probably do a little deep dive in there. I'm just not sure what I'm going to do yet. Actually, in the Q&A would be a good time to maybe even throw out some topics that you'd be interested in for day 2 and day 3. In any case, that's our agenda today. And just also, I'm going to be talking a lot. I can't really hear you because it's a webinar, but please do not be shy. Ask those questions as we go. Don't wait for the Q&A session. And we'll, if it's a really good question, we'll just call it out, interrupt me, and I'll try to answer it as we go. So goals for this training, this is kind of the overall goals for all 3 days. Really, the first bullet point should be how to become a great LabKey server administrator. There's a lot to that job. It's actually a huge job, but that's really the main goal, is to become an admin, become a proficient admin of the server. Not a user, it's a little bit deeper. It's a deeper task to become an admin. Some of the highlights of that role include knowing the basic server architecture, managing users, and controlling their access to data. Generally becoming proficient with the LabKey toolkit, and that, to kind of unpack that means like modeling and analyzing data, presenting data in compelling ways, building apps and dashboards with LabKey server, and that I could go on and on. But I also think another thing that's important to keep in mind when you're an admin, you are sort of like a god of the server. You're sort of like the team lead as an admin. And so you're really helping other users meet their goals with the server. That's really, really a big part of being an admin. So I want to kind of keep that in mind as we go. So anyways, day 1. server basics. This is really a presentation I give for people that don't know anything about LabKey, that really don't know the first thing about it other than just there's this thing called LabKey Server. What do I do now? And so in this presentation, I really try to ask the simplest questions I can imagine. What is LabKey? What's it do? What's it for? How does it work? How do I use it? How do I build stuff with it? But before we even get to those questions, it's kind of nice, I think, to get a little sense of like, maybe where did LabKey come from? Like, how did this thing arise in the world? Well, LabKey Server, the company, really began, gosh, 23 years ago now, back in 2003. Our original incarnation was we were 3 developers inside the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center here in Seattle. Those 3 developers kind of took some spare office desks and put out a shingle and said, scientists, bring us your data problems. The very first problem that ever came through the door was a proteomics researcher. And this researcher just had too much data. It was hard to manage all the proteomics data, didn't know what to do with it, didn't know where to put it, didn't know how to structure it and order it. Well, we built a proteomics tool for that user. And actually that tool became the core of the MS2 module that's still in the server today. And lots of features have been built out around proteomics. And ever since 2003, lots of other scientists have come to us and said, we've got too much clinical data, or it's too complex, or we can't figure it out. We can't figure out how to analyze it or structure it in a way that's optimal. Well, we helped them out, and that became the study module. We're gonna look closely at the study module on day 3. And really hundreds of scientists have come to us over the years, each with their own set of problems. We've responded by building out solutions for them. We've tried to make those solutions as general as possible so that they don't just apply to that one scientist, they apply to kind of the domain as a whole. And so a lot of features have built up over the years. And basically what has happened is LabKey Server has turned into an enormous toolkit for scientists. And these scientists, they're all different stripes. There's kind of small lab scientists, there's big pharma scientists, there's kind of in between academic scientists, whatnot. They're all working in different domains like, biologics or drug development or whatever, lots of different domains. But there's really something in the toolkit for all of them. So, I've already answered my first question here. What is LabKey Server? It's an enormous toolkit with all kinds of different kinds of apps and dashboards and mini tools that you can use, assemble together to build your own solutions to your own scientific problems. There's hundreds of these features, hundreds of these tools. It's hard to summarize them. There's so many, but I think they really break down into 3 different buckets, 3 different categories of tools. And the first bucket I'll call the data repository. That is all of the features that can capture data and get it into the server. And so this also includes all the features that are about latching that data together. A lot of times scientists have lots of different kinds of data. They might have clinical data. They might have questionnaire data, assay data from that lab, sample data from the freezer, things like that. But they don't necessarily know how to hook them together. Well, this first group of features also knows how to latch those data together to form a coherent whole and an analyzable whole. The second feature group we'll call the data showcase. These are all the features that know how to put data out into the world, that know how to present data to the world and highlight it, make it meaningful. I'll also include in this bucket all the collaboration features. So these are the collaboration features allow you to work together, either with other scientists internally or externally, say with the general public. You want to say show them something or collect data from them. And I also would include the security features here in the second bucket. That's because essentially security, one way to think about security is it's about creating relationships between some chunk of data and some audience out there, no matter whatever the audience is, creating an appropriate relationship between them. And so that's the second bucket. We'll call that the data showcase bucket. And then the third set of features is kind of everything in between pulling data into the server and putting data out of the server. We'll call these features the electronic laboratory. These are all the features that help you analyze data, interrogate data. These features help you craft reports, craft insight and visualizations. And so those are kind of the three features sets that I think pretty much any feature can land in one of those three buckets. LabKey is also a software platform. And by that, I mean, it's to distinguish it from a product. A software product is like Excel. You know, you open up Excel and it presents its features to you, and that's about it. It has relatively fixed use cases, although Excel's a pretty sophisticated product. It's still, the use cases are fairly narrow. It's built for a specific set of purposes. You have limited DIY potential with Excel. I mean, you can do macros and scripting, but it's still kind of within a domain. You can't really go behind the scenes. Whereas with a software platform, kind of everything's reversed there. There are no fixed use cases, or they're so broad that they're just expansive. The field of use cases is just really kind of goes over the horizon. It's very general purpose. It's very much a toolkit for DIY software development. And you can very much go behind the scenes. That's what admins do. We go behind the scenes. We're sort of the Wizard of Oz. We're presenting something out to, the users out there. And I think a great analogy here is products like a car, platforms like a car factory or a car part warehouse. With a car, you just get in and you drive it. With a factory, you can build any kind of car you want. And the disadvantages of a platform, I mean, it sounds like platforms are way better, but there is a disadvantage to platforms. You have to learn something to make it go. You have to learn a lot more to make a platform work. And that's partly why we're doing these trainings today. Here's kind of a graphical picture of what I just said, the three buckets. The red column is like all of the input features, all of the features that pull data in, clinical data, specimen data, proteomics, whatever, and latch them together. The third column in green, these are all the features about sending data out into the world, showing data to scientists, showing data to the collaborators and the general public. And then in between are all the features of interrogation, reporting. Probably security shouldn't be there, but I don't know how to put security in the third column, so I just put it there. So make this a little concrete, make this a little more concrete. Here's a list of typical use cases for LabKey Server. And I've tried to order them from really simple to really more complex. And the simplest possible use case I can think for LabKey is like sharing files on the web. And we're not going to analyze, like they think of Dropbox. Dropbox, you basically, what does it do? You can upload files and you can download files and you can see files. And that's roughly it. Now, if you're an employee of Dropbox, you probably might disagree, but my characterization, I'll keep it at that. That's really easy to build in LabKey. You can just kind of build that. We're not analyzing the files. This server doesn't hardly even know what's in the files, although it will do a full text search on those files. And we'll actually build that as our first demo. During this first unit, we'll build Dropbox. The second, use case here is a collaboration portal for one or more users, one or more teams. And this is also really easy to build in LabKey. LabKey's fundamentally online, and it's easy to build little websites with it and send people the URL. Great. Third use case, I think this is very common. People want to escape from Excel. There was a training about 4 years ago or something where somebody said, well, isn't the whole point of LabKey to escape from Excel and get your data into a database? Well, kind of. I mean, in one respect, yeah. I think there might be an argument that this is the single most important part of LabKey, although there's lots of parts to LabKey. But why escape from Excel and go put your data in a database? Well, you get some advantages. When you move from Excel to a database, you're moving from a pretty wild, unstructured data world, Excel, into a more controlled, structured data world, the database. And there's some disadvantages to that. It's kind of harder to, you can't just do whatever you want inside a database. You got things like data types. You can't put a text value inside of an integer field. So you got some restrictions there, but you've got great advantages too, because when you have structured data, your reporting and your interrogation become infinitely easier, or just downright possible. And you can do things like join data with other data much more effectively. You can validate your data, clean it up much more effectively. You can keep bad data out and get good data in. There's lots of advantages to working with a database. And this is one of the great advantages of LabKey. It's fundamentally data in a database. And really, day 2, we're going to do a deep dive on what that database really means, what it can do for you. And, I could go on. I don't want to go through this list all in gory detail, but as we kind of go up the scale of complexity, we see that, a lot of people use LabKey to capture their laboratory data, their clinical data, their specimen data. They use LabKey to latch all that data together into one coherent whole that they can analyze and present and test hypotheses against. And then there's also more sort of security features as well that people start to use here, like if they have PHI data or sensitive data of some type, they can build special handling around that data and whatnot. And at the highest level of complexity, I think what people are doing is they're collecting data from many different sources, say even hundreds of different sources, latching it all together, building reports and dashboards and applications around the whole thing, and then building interfaces, user interfaces with that data, each user interface intended for a different audience. So there might be a user interface for the clinicians, for like the doctors and nurses, and that And then there might be a separate interface for the researchers, say a de-identified type of environment. And then there might be a third environment where they don't even show raw data, but just report level data or aggregate level data for the general public to show the results of the research, whatnot. And I'm, here's to make give a concrete example of such a complex use case. Take a look at the 100,000 Genomes Project out of Genomics England. This is like 5 or 6 years old now, even more. And that group, notice I've kept my color coding here. Red means data input, green means data output, and blue means sort of data interrogation. They've collected data from hundreds of different clinics, like done cheek swabs, analyzed those results, grabbed a whole bunch of other clinical data, put it all into LabKey Server, and built these different environments for people, including portals for the doctors, portals for the researchers, and then portals for the general public. This is a great project. It's really fun. You should Google it, look at sort of their public-facing stuff. It's LabKey, all underneath it covers them. I see a question here. I'm just going to see if it's great. No, I'm just going to add Nancy. Actually, somebody asks here, Excel has a lot of formatting issues. How are these handled during the upload to LabKey, such as data formats, et cetera? That's a great question. And I wanted to call it out because it's exactly what I want to do today during my deep dive. We're going to do a deep dive on data grids, and I'm going to actually take an Excel file and move it into LabKey, and we're going to touch on some of those problems as we go. And then we're going to do it again on day 2. It's a great topic. It's a great question. Lots to say about it. So anyways, again, just to kind of get into some more detail here, I think I've got 4 concepts here, I think, that are a great way to sort of start getting your head around LabKey in detail. Like these are great admin concepts to know. And the first is the concept of a folder. A folder is just totally fundamental to LabKey. Everything exists in a folder. And anyways, so folders, totally fundamental. Web parts. Web parts are like panels, and they are the tools. I've been saying that LabKey is a giant toolkit. Web parts are the tools. They do there's hundreds of different web parts. They each do a different kind of thing. We'll take a look at that. Modules are like the toolkits. They're like the functional sets of LabKey. And data grids. Data grids are like the basic data presentation. They're the foundation of data presentation in the server. Kind of everything starts with the data grid. And we'll get into that. So let's take a look at these in more detail. First off, folders. Well, first of all, let's just look at a folder. I'm going to go to a server. Here's my LabKey server training server. It's just a big mess. This is the home page. I'm not really proud of it. It's just kind of an image and some folders to link into, and that's about it. But the folders are available on every server from this menu. If you hover over it, you can see that this particular server has, 100 folders in it? I don't even know. You have to scroll down to see how many. This is just a giant, messy server. It has lots of different users that just play around on it and do experiments with it. So that's why it's a mess. It's not a very coherent server. But the folders are here, and you can sort of get a sense of what's happening on this server just from looking at the folder names. Like main project. This is a folder that I created just about 10 minutes ago, and it's going to be what we work with in this server. What does it look like? Well, it's just nothing at this point. What about this home folder? Every server comes with a home folder, and you can build it out however you want. I did this messy thing here. There's a bunch of some of these folders have subfolders. So look at, here's a folder called demos LK. So this is a set of demos for LabKey server, and it has a bunch of subfolders in it. And you can see that by opening up that little node here, demos LK. there's a presentation, there's a folder, a subfolder called LabKey Table Basics, SQL examples, RedCap, assay, a whole bunch of stuff. Anyways, it goes on and on. So there's each one of these. So what are folders in LabKey? That's what they look like, and that's how you navigate them. But what are they really for? Well, they're like the workspaces. They're the blank canvases of the server. And kind of everything exists in a folder. You can't really do anything outside of a folder. All the data, all the reports, all your designs, everything you configure, it's always in the context of some folder or other. Folders are super important for security. They are how data is separated into buckets. And they're kind of like, each folder is sort of like a different, potentially a different website, essentially, that can be independently secured and be given to a target audience. They're like stages. I think of them, each folder is like a stage that a different audience can be admitted to view. Folders also come in different types. So some of the folder types are collaboration, assay, study, sample manager, biologics, they go on. And so different folder types are for different purposes, different sort of domain purposes. Again, folders can be configured like different websites, essentially. And another thing that's really important, a terminology thing, the largest folders are called projects, or also folders, but there's a kind of a special term for them called projects. So let's go back home. Each one of these folders at the top level, they're all projects. They're also folders. When I open one up, I see subfolders. So it's just an important, why is it important? Projects and folders are fundamentally kind of the same kind of thing. They're just containers that you put stuff in. But projects become really important for especially for configuration. Because when you configure things in a project, you can make those configurations cascade down into the subfolders. And that is just a pattern you see over and over again in the server. And it takes a while to learn it, to kind of feel the depth of what that means. But for an admin, it's really important to know that. So, and a good example is, maybe you define a table inside of a project, like the shape of a table, like it has 4 fields and 2 of them are integers and one of them is text and whatnot. Well, that table can then be, if you want it to be, can be available in all the subfolders. Or let's suppose you configure some security. You say this folder, this project can be shown to users A, B, C, and D. Well, that's also a kind of a configuration that you can apply to all the subfolders or not. But it can be very convenient to have that kind of shareable configuration that spans many folders. Anyways, that's a huge, I just sort of touched on a huge theme. We're going to keep coming back to that theme. It's just one of the things administrators need to know over and over again. It's sort of that pattern keeps reemerging. Okay, so folders, super fundamental. Everything is about folders. 2, web parts. Second concept is web parts. Web parts are the panels that surface functionality. They're configurable. You assemble the web parts as an admin. You say, oh, well, this folder needs this web part, that web part, and that web part to accomplish this goal. And so, in fact, this horrible looking page is just a folder, the home folder, with some web parts assembled on it. There's 3 web parts. You might not see the boundaries here, but there's 3 web parts here. And actually, you can, I'm going to go into, there's this gear menu. This is the admin menu. This is, if you're an admin, you see the gear. And the gear kind of goes behind the scenes and and it sort of turns in, you can turn the server into admin mode. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to go to the gear. I'm going to go into something called page admin mode. So now I'm putting on my admin hat. Well, what just happened? Maybe not a lot, but notice a little bit of UI turned on. There's these little chevrons that turned on. There's this little plus thing turned on. There's more of these chevrons here. Well, these chevrons are how you can configure things. The other thing that turned on was these drop downs. Notice there's a drop down here. And what I'm doing here is I'm selecting web parts to add to the page. So I'm just going to add this. There's this web part called files. What happens when I add that? Well, a new panel surfaces, and it shows me all the files. I'm already hinting at the Dropbox app I'm going to build. This right here is a panel I already added here. And I'm going to I took the borders off, but I'm going to put the borders back on and make it show frame. To turn the borders back on to make it a little more clear where the boundaries of the web parts are. This is just a wiki page. This is another web part. I'm going to turn the frame back on to make the boundaries of it more clear. This is just a presentation of all the subfolders. Oh no, I'm taking it back. This is just a presentation of all the projects. It's kind of a re-presentation of the project menu, of the folder menu. And a lot of these are configurable. So if I wanted to say, no, I actually want that to be about the subfolders, I could actually go to that chevron, go to customize, and say, I don't want to show the projects, I want to show the subfolders of the home project. So now, great, now I do that. Now I'm just seeing that there's two little subfolders of the home project. Then here's another panel of the files, a little bit, notice it's a little bit broader. It's a repeat of this panel, but this is the skinny version on the right. There's two places to put your web parts. There's the right side and the left side. The left side's kind of thick and the right side's kind of thin. And the functionality kind of will contract with the space as well. So you can see there's a files area with 4 buttons. That's because it's on the right. But if you surface that same thing on the left, you get more. You get a bunch more buttons, whatever that is, a dozen plus, dozen buttons, and just a little bit more stuff gets surfaced because there's more space to surface it. Okay, so that's web parts. You assemble your apps and your dashboards and your functionality by surfacing different web parts. Modules. Well, modules are just tool sets. They're just toolkits. They contain all the user interface, aka the web parts, all the application logic, all the handling of requests and the crafting of responses that the server can do. And they tend to be sort of domain specific. So there's a module called experiment. And the experiment module knows how to capture assay data and sample data and present it. It's a very complex module. It's a lot to the assay module. There's the study module. The study module knows how to grab clinical data and integrate it with other kinds of data, like sample data, laboratory data, things like that. It also knows how to do things like handle special. It knows how to de-identify data. Like it can take your participant data and hide it or encrypt it. Well, encrypt's the wrong word. It can scramble it. There's a module called file content. And the file content has one web part. And it's right here. This is the file content module is a relatively easy module. And here's what it does. It does this. It presents files. The other thing that's important about modules is that they have home pages. They tend to have home pages. And you can see those home pages off the gear menu. If you go to the gear menu, there's the go to module area. And notice here's all the modules that I've activated in the folder. And let's just look at some of these home pages. Like, what does the experiment homepage look like? Well, it's a whole bunch of other panels. It's like kind of it's almost like a summary of all the panels that are available. So it's like there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. I won't even explain it till day 2. Let's go to some other modules. Let's go to the file content module, the home page for the file content module. Lo and behold, it's the file. It's that thing all over again. It's that file browser. And another thing that's important about modules, folders contain modules, or I should say, put it a different way. Modules are activated or deactivated for a given folder. Well, how do I know which modules are available in a given folder? Well, there's a place to go. You go to the gear menu and you go to folder management. That's one way to get to this area. There's a whole bunch of tabs on folder management for the given folder, for the present folder. As an admin, this is your biggest page. Like this is the biggest behind the scenes area that you're going to go to over and over again. There's so many tabs here. Go to the folder type tab and you'll see here are the modules that are enabled in the current folder, home. There's a bunch of them. And if I were to add more, I could just click on more. What would happen is I'd get more web parts served up to me. Notice there's a folder type area over here. We'll get to that in a minute. Anyways, this is finally data grids. Data grids are really the main tool for data display and manipulation and interrogation in the server. There's other tools too, but they're sort of the basic tool. There's a toolbar on top of the data grids, which gives you lots of tooling, things to do with the data grid. And data grids surface database tables. Let's just look at one to make it a little more concrete. Let's go to, I'm just going to go to some random thing here. Let's go here. Let's go to this. I'm here inside. Let me turn off admin mode to make it a little simpler looking. And let's actually find a table. Yeah, here's a nice simple data grid. And it used to be an Excel file. And what I've done is I took an Excel file and I imported it into the server, and this is what I got. I got this data grid. Again, it's surfacing a database table, and there's always a toolbar on top of the data grid. So there's all kinds of things you can do with data grids, like you can filter and sort the columns. So suppose I wanted to, here's a gender column. Suppose I wanted to filter this. I can actually click that column, pull up the filter dialog and say, I just want to see the males in this demographics table. Great, now I got rid of all the female rows. Suppose I also wanted to sort this alphabetically by country. I could do that by saying sort ascending, and then I get FGU. And I can keep adding different filters and sorts to make a more compelling or a more sensible, salient data presentation out of this grid. You can also do things like build reports and visualizations on top of the grids. So that's off of this toolbar. You notice this toolbar here. There's a charts and reports button with a whole bunch of stuff to do here, different reports you can make. There's an insert data button. So this is like if I want to add more data to the grid. There's a delete button, which is grayed out. You need to select something. So if I select a row, now that delete button is turned on, I have the option to delete that row. There's an export button. There's a design button. This is where I go behind the scenes and mess with the table design itself. I can delete all rows if I want because I'm an admin. This is one of those buttons that only shows up for admins. Anyway, so the button bar is always a little different depending on what kind of table it is and what your user permissions are. Anyways, we're going to go deeper with that in a minute. I just want to say that those are sort of 4 really important concepts: folders, web parts, modules, data grids. A little bit on the server environment. LabKey Server exists sort of stuck in between the browsers and the databases, kind of mediates between them. And basically what happens in those three layers is requests are originated in the browser. So you sort of ask a question. And really that's what I'm doing here when I say things, to go back to my data grid, when I say things like show me, I'm going to change the filter and say, just show me the female rows. I'm really generating a request. I'm saying, right now I'm saying, just show me, will you please just show me the female rows? And LabKey did a whole thing there. It took that request, it tried to parse it and understand it. It actually then built a database query from that my gestural question. It went to the database with that. It got back a result set, and then it repackaged that result set as a data grid and put it back in the browser. And that's what's happening here. And it's actually happening off the URL. It's actually the URL whole is the request. And then this is the response, this data grid. You can actually operate it from the URL. This is another great admin trick. You can operate this stuff from the URL. So right at the end here, you can see the filter, gender equals F. Well, what if I say gender equals M? Well, great, it gives me a new response. What if I see something that doesn't exist, like gender equals X? There's no such data. Not in that table. So it's modules that do all that work to help kind of put this all together. There's all kinds of modules, and in this particular case, it's mostly the query module that did all the work. Query module is we didn't talk about it yet, but the query module is the module that knows how to understand data requests and turn them into SQL queries if necessary. Here's another example of the request response cycle. The requests are URLs, responses are some kind of thing on the browser. URL patterns. This is a great thing for admins to know. Every URL basically has 5 parts. There's the server name, the folder path, the module, the action, and then details parameters. And you can see that here. Even though this might look like a really complex URL, it's really only got 5 parts. First, there's the server name right there, learn.labkey.com. That's it. Second is the folder path. We're 2 folders deep. We're at demos LK and in the subfolder tables basics. So that's the second part. The third part is the module name, and that's right here, project. After the dash, there's the action, that's begin. Those are the 4 basic parts of the URL. And then the 5th part's details. That comes after, details come after the question mark. And that's all like filters and crap and whatnot. And again, you can operate the URL. Like if I rip this down, if I rip off all the details, it'll sort of give me this default view of the page again. Actually, I moved tab. I moved the tab there. I didn't want to do that. But if I go back to the tab. So anyways, that's a lot to take in, I know. But next time you're looking at a LabKey page, look at that URL and see if you can parse it for yourself. It's really nice to be able to do it. And you can, once you know how to do it, you can really do a lot. Like, for example, like if I just rip this, first I'm going to rip the page down to just the basic page. What happens if I just switch out project module for file content? Well, lo and behold, I can go to the home page for the file content module. Or I know there's also a module called query. Well, lo and behold, I'm at the query module homepage. And this is actually giving me a view of all the data in this folder. This is like kind of a shopping area for data or warehouse area for data. We'll get more into that tomorrow. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to kind of bop ahead here a little bit. Let's do something. Let's actually build something. I'm going to build that. I said I was going to build Dropbox. Let's do it.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, we have a
great. Yeah, please.
Are these folder contents also saved in the LabKey database?
Yeah, they are actually. And it's a great question, actually. It's actually interesting. There's a lot to say to that. But a lot of LabKey's kind of internal concepts are saved in database tables. So all the folders, in fact, are in a table called folders or containers. I'm sorry, it's called containers. So I'm gonna go to the query browser and show you that table. So there's a bunch of different table groupings: announcement, assay, audit, core is the one I want to go to. There's a core, the table group called core is where LabKey does a lot of those system tables. And notice there's a whole bunch of tables here. I want to go to containers and I'm going to view it. Well, it's only going to show me the table. There's a lot to this table, but it's only showing me one row right now. I'm going to modify that table to show all the rows. I'll get into this tomorrow. Don't worry about what I'm doing. This is all of the folders on the server in a table format in the database. So here they are: PIC modeling, NLP folder, table basics, Bernie, project B, project C, just a whole bunch of those folders. And I can navigate using this too. If I want to go to project, what's this project B? What's that? Whatever that is. Good question.
Okay, another one here. Can projects modules interact with LabKey biologics, or are they
Yes.
separate?
No, in fact, biologics is just a module. It's kind of cool. I mean, so is sample manager. And you can see that. Let's go over to folder management and look at the modules. Lo and behold, there's a module called biologics. If I were to turn this on, I'd turn on biologics. Lo and behold, there's also a module called sample manager. If I were to turn that on, I'd turn on sample manager. So that's all that is too. Great. Another great question.
Okay,
Another?
Yep, last one here. Please explain, how do you create those tabs pointing to a data set?
Great. Yeah, let's go
You can
here.
link to a web part to a tab, but how to link to a web page of the project, or as here to a data set?
Well, there's a lot to that question, but I'll first show you just how to turn on a tab. You got to go into page admin mode. That's what that little plus is right here. Make a new tab. So if I click that little plus and I say new tab, oh, I already have that. So you can't do duplicate names. So we'll call new tab 2. Now I've got a new tab, totally blank. I can start adding web parts and whatnot. And the rest of this is. Oh, okay. Was there more to that question, Will? Could you say a little bit more?
Yeah. So, yep. Please explain, how do you create those tabs pointing to a data set? We can link to a web part.
Yeah.
We can link a web part to a tab, but how to link to a web page of the project, or as here, to a data set?
I'm not quite sure on all that. Let's parse that later. I'll try to answer what I think one of the things you're asking is, one of the ways to surface a table is to use a web part. And I'm going to do that. Say there's lots of different tables, but I'm going to say this list web part. List single is a way to surface a table. And I can just pick a list here like this one, languages. And sure enough, now I have a web part with that table surfaced on it. There's a lot to that question. Let's kind of hold off on it. I just didn't quite understand it all and a little bit short on time. I got another question here. Could you read that, Will?
Yeah, in a table, data set, list, sample set, is it possible to have a column where the values are unique? So in addition to participant ID, I have a column which accepts only unique values.
Yes, in fact, it's a new feature. I've actually never played with it. It's literally a new feature. I'll take a look at it and see if I can find it. on this server. But I just read the release notes for our upcoming release, and we've introduced something that it's exactly what you're asking for, if I understand it correctly. But I'll try to play with it as we go. Great. I feel like there's a question there that we didn't quite fully answer. Not we'll keep track of that. So anyways, let's actually build Dropbox and get a feel for it. So I'm going to go to my main project. I just built this project. It's just a default project. By the way, just to give you a sense of what it's like to make a new project, like make a new piece of real estate, what you do is you hover over the folder menu, and there's a button right here called New Project. So what you do is you go to New Project. It needs a name. We'll call it, test project. It needs a folder type. All you're doing when you select folder type is you're selecting module sets. And they're easy to change later. You saw that. You can just get rid of modules or add modules at will. What you're doing here is you're saying just like, give me a likely group of modules. So give me, if the default is collaboration, I'm going to take the likely set of collaboration modules. I can refine it later. There's a bunch of other stuff. I always take the defaults here. Like I don't want to do permissions yet. I don't want to do deeper settings yet. I'm just going to take all the defaults for all that stuff. And lo and behold, you get a new project. If you want to delete it, like I don't want this. By the way, what am I seeing here? I'm seeing some empty web parts. 4 web parts. Subfolders, wiki, messaging, and pages. I haven't put anything in here yet, so they look really boring. They are really boring. If you want to delete, I just want to delete this. I'm not going to use this project. If I want to delete it, you go to the folder, good old folder management. Make sure you're selecting test project wherever you want to delete and click delete. There'll be a big scary message because you can't really come back from this. Like deleting is most things in LabKey you can recover from. This is one of the things you can't recover from. So you should, when you delete something, you should actually read this. So what am I going to say? It says, you're about to delete the following project and its subfolders. Test project, all its subfolders aren't any, and all the objects it contains, which aren't any. Okay, is that okay? I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll do that. That's okay. I mean, you can recover. If you're doing database backups, you can recover, but it's a pain. So anyways, let's go to our main project, which is relatively empty. And is there a performance impact for enabling additional modules? Not really. There really isn't. By the way, I just answered a question. It said, is there a performance impact for enabling additional modules? I don't really think so. Just if they're there, just kind of enabled in the background, not really. Your web part dropdowns become really complex, though. They just become really huge. But there's mostly not really a problem there. I'm going to clear out all of this stuff. I don't want subfolders. I don't want wikis yet. I don't want messaging. I don't want pages. I do want files. I've got an empty file browser here. Let's put some files on it. I'm going to go to downloads and let's do cell culture. Let's add this study XML file. There's this error log. This is just random stuff. What else might be fun to add here? Here's this participants data. Here's this. These are all really boring data sets. Here's another cell culture. Text. Here's some others. Anyway, so I've got some data. I got some files up there. Great. Now, I'm already have an app, essentially. I could now reveal this to the world and people could interact with it. They could download stuff from it and whatnot. And in fact, let's dude, I'm going to take this error log out because that's from a client, and I don't think, and this is from a client, I kind of regret putting it there. I don't think that we want to show that to the world. But the rest of all this stuff is just stuff I invented, data I invented out of my imagination. I'm going to open this to the world. And we'll get into this in a second, but I'm going to go to the permissions area. And there's a bunch, we'll get into this. I'm going to say, I'm going to give reader power. That means the ability to see to the general public. And this is how you do that in LabKey. You say, guests, that's a group of people, guests are readers. That's what I'm saying there. Guests are readers. Guests are anybody in the world, anybody with a browser can now see this folder. That's what I'm saying here. Again, the next unit will be all about this page. That's what I'm doing. So I just built my first app and I opened it to the general public. It's on, you can go there. If you go to learnlabkey.com and then use the use that menu and go to main project, you'll see this very thing. And what can you do with it? Well, you can upload files and you can download files from it. I'm going to add a little bit more functionality. I'm going to put search functionality on here. So I'm going to say there's a little search button here, search box, because LabKey has already taken these 4 files and indexed them, and they're now searchable. So if, is the term pH anywhere? Yes. The term pH is in the cell culture Excel, and it's also in the nutrient profile Excel. That's what that means. So anyways, first little app, great, easy. Let's see what else we got here to do. Oh, another just kind of cool fact for administrators to know is folders are reusable as templates. And now imagine that this little app I built's really complicated and it's got full of tabs and full of reports and full of different kinds of data, and it was hard to do. It didn't take me 3 minutes, and I wanted to reuse it. Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. One way is is just export this thing, and you can export it again through our good old folder management area. And there's an export tab. And this is a place where I can select all of the possible things in that folder and export it to this zip file. And there's I'm just going to take all the defaults here and I'm going to export it. And what I end up with is this Excel file. This zip file, excuse me. Now I can go and import this zip file somewhere else and just sort of recreate this app. So that's just a really nice little feature. So think about folders as kind of reusable, sort of like templates. And it's a good way to sort of distribute and reuse or clone functionality. A couple of best practices around folders. Like you're a new admin. How do you structure the folders on a site? Well, I think the first thing to kind of be aware of is don't make a folder for every little thing. I think this is a really common mistake for new folks. They think for every table needs a new folder. And I don't really think that's necessarily correct. I think you should think about folders as basically independent websites and as things that are sort of revealed or hidden as a whole. Because in general, LabKey's security, although very wonderful, doesn't have a lot of granularity below the folder granularity. That's not, now, don't take me totally at face value there. there are ways to achieve table level security, row level security, and we'll show how to do that, especially tomorrow. But in general, you should think that each folder is something that you're going to reveal as a whole to the world, including all of its content. And so in general, I think a new folder, there's really kind of two reasons to make a new folder. You've got brand new data of a whole new domain that doesn't go with any other pre-existing data on your site. And, or you have a new audience that you want to target. There's a new audience that doesn't fit anywhere else on your site. Those are the two reasons to make a new folder. If you're not doing one of those two things, do you really need a new folder? Are you sure your table can't go somewhere else? Anyways, so in general, keep it simple. You don't need lots of complicated folders. Oh, and JMAB, somebody's asking another question here. What's the difference between folders and projects? And just a refresher on that, projects are just big folders. That's it. That's really all there is to it. The folder, all of these things are folders off this menu. Some of them are projects. The big ones are projects. Main project, that's a project. It's home, that's a project. If I open up home and see these folders inside, these are just subfolders. Blah, blah, blah. Often projects are like empty shells. They become sort of, they don't really contain a lot except for security configuration and data shapes, like table definitions, things like that, and all the real actions happening down in the subfolders. There's a lot more here, but I'm just going to keep going here. And also some kind of basic best practices for working with LabKey. Most importantly, don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. It happens all the time. People get sort of, they start to get into LabKey and they start to see there's so many ways to do things, so many ways to implement things. And they get stuck thinking about it. They're like, well, I could do this and I could do it that way, but this way has these advantages and this way has those advantages. I think it's really important to just immediately start to build something concrete and iterate on it. And it's going to work out better. We've had clients who have really spent months and months in that kind of paralysis state. They're spinning their wheels. It's a big time sink. Don't worry. Don't go there. Another great maxim for software development generally is first make it work, then make it work better. I really believe this. It's just a better way to go. Build something immediately and then take stock of its strengths and weaknesses and try to shore up its weaknesses. If it's slow or ugly or doesn't look great, don't worry about it. Fix it later. If it works well enough, good. Generally, you should document stuff as you go, especially if you're building out something complex. It's not always easy to, there's lots of little buttons and levers and configurations, and it's like this enormous cave that you can forget which rooms in the cave you've been in and what things you've touched and which buttons you've pressed. And so if you're building something complex, I really document it as you go. The basic workflow, again, just to read it, this kind of repeat of what I just said. Create some real estate, import some data, refine your dashboards and functionality, repeat, iterate. Learn the 5 big data structures. We're going to learn those in a minute. And tomorrow we're going to do a deep dive on them. You generally can't break the server by adding or deleting web parts. You can break the server by deleting folders. You can lose stuff, but deleting web parts generally just surface things. They don't actually, like if you delete a web part, that's a data grid. The data's still there. Don't worry about it. Anyways, lots of stuff here. Oh, okay, fine. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's lots of pre-built functionality in LabKey. Try to use it as much as you can before you do something novel. research, read the docs. What are some possible solutions that would work pre-built? You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Generally. Okay, so that's kind of my first unit. I want to do a little mini unit on data grids. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with an Excel file. And here's a little Excel file. I have one more question here. Could it be possible to upload data from different databases into LabKey instead of Excel? If yes, do we need to add some connectivity code? The answer to that is yes. LabKey has a way to capture pre-existing database data. It's something called an external database, external data source. So if we support different kinds of databases like Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL Server, SAS, maybe even some others, Redshift maybe. So if you have data in those kind of containers, you can have a little connectivity code that goes there and says, hey, give me that data. It's just a little database URL, really, essentially. You take that, what you do is you take that database URL and you put it in Tomcat. It's not something you actually do inside the server so much. And then Tomcat will serve the data up to LabKey, and you can see it inside of LabKey and surface it as data grids and work with it. So yeah, totally possible. People do it all the time. It's one of the best parts of LabKey because it gives you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already in a database. Make it, surface it in LabKey. Done. And we'll take a look at that tomorrow when we look at database stuff a little more thoroughly. But what I want to do right now is I want to just kind of go back to the basics and start with an Excel file. How do you turn that into a data grid? Here's my Excel file. It represents a simple 7-day experiment. And what I did is I had a culture broth of cells. I'm growing cells. And I measured the pH over 7 days. So there's the culture day. I measured the pH, which tended to rise. I measured the sugar. I don't know what my metric is here. There's a number, but that tended to fall. And then I measured the viability of cells. And it started at 100% were viable, and then it dropped down to 10%. So there's a little experiment. I want to analyze it. I want to put it on LabKey, present it to the world, do a little report on it. How do I do that? First step is to get it into the server, get it into a data grid, into a table. So how do I do that? Well, first of all, let's return to data grids. Again, they're the basic presentation tool for data. They're the basis of reports. They're the basis of data action in the server. Again, they come from databases. And this is really important. We're going to really focus on this tomorrow. There's different kinds of tables for different purposes. There's 5 main table types in LabKey. This is the most important part of the training, are these 5 things. There's lists. Lists are like generic tables. They're mostly kind of general purpose. There's assay designs. These are tables specifically designed to hold experiment data. And we're going to dive deep on those tomorrow. Data sets, these are clinical tables with clinical data for participants. They have participants and visits and whatnot. We're going to go deep on those on day 3. The data sets are the core of the study module. They're what make the study module go. 4th, there's sample types. These are tables specifically designed to hold samples and vials and tissues and things like that, and store them in freezers. And then there's data classes. And data classes I hesitate to put them here because they're important. They're sort of like general metadata. We probably won't really do much with data classes here, but if you work with sample types in biologics, data classes become more important. We'll do a little bit with sample types tomorrow because they go together with assays. But in any case, these are kind of the 5 main table types. So anytime you ask yourself, like, okay, I got Excel and I want to put it in LabKey, you got to also ask yourself which table type. I should probably do an assay design, but I'm going to do a list because tomorrow's for assay design. And lists are general purpose. Maybe I won't totally get an optimal result by putting my data in a list, but I'll do it anyways. All tables are just fields in LabKey. They're just basically sets of fields. And the fields come in different field types like integer, decimal, string, text, etc. But I'll get to that when I get to the designer. Let's just get going here. I'm going to go to my main project. I'm going to add a tab. I'm going to go into admin mode and get ready to put this thing get this data up there. I'm going to add a new tab, and I'm going to call it the cell culture tab. And there's a couple of ways to work with lists in LabKey. I want to build a list. I want to make a list. One way is to go to the admin menu, the gear menu, and there's a place for managing lists. I'll just do that. I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to go to the list area, the list module, essentially. And there's a button here called create. There's already a bunch of lists that are kind of from other places. But I'm going to create a new list. There's a button for it right here. And I'm going to call this the cell culture list. And now I'm ready to define the fields. And I could define the fields manually, but I'm going to actually just do this by letting LabKey inspect my Excel sheet and give me an answer. So let's point LabKey at the cell culture table, Excel, and LabKey inspects that, and he says, oh, I see 5 fields, 5 columns. There's sample ID, culture day, pH, sugar, and viability. And LabKey picked the data type for these. It guessed the data type. Now, notice it's picked sample, integer, decimal, decimal, integer. I am going to change sample. I don't sample it really. When it says sample here, LabKey really means this is like a meaningful data type. And I don't, it brings, when you say sample here, you bring in a lot of functionality that I don't want right now. And I'm just going to say, can we just make this a string field for now? A text field. So that's what I'm going to say. The sample ID is just going to be a text field for now. We'll worry about samples tomorrow. Culture day is an integer. That is an integer. It's going to be day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not going to be day 2.5. pH is a decimal. Sugar is a decimal. Viability percent, LabKey thinks it's an integer. I'm going to correct that. I'm going to say, no, this is a decimal. At least I want to be able to, the option of putting decimals in there. And if you notice, there's a bunch of different kind of field types to pick from that are really interesting. Like there's text choice and multi-line text and lookup and all that stuff. We'll worry about that later. But just to let you know, there's a bunch of different field types. They bring in different kind of functionality. Now, I'm going to say, now if I scroll down, it gives me also a preview of, it's going to import the data when I do this and when I click save. Now I'm going to get an error when I click save. Why? I didn't pick a key. It says, you must specify a key field for your list to continue. And that's right here. There's a drop down here. When you make a list, you need to specify a primary key. And the primary key is like the unique column. It's the address for the row of every row in the table. Not every table needs a key in LabKey. A lot of times the keys are managed internally. But for lists, the user needs to select the key. And I'm going to select, you can either select a unique column in the table itself, like in my case, sample ID or culture data happen to be unique. So LabKey's offering them to me as unique name fields, unique key fields. But maybe they won't be unique later on. So I'm going to say, let you imagine internally, use an auto integer incrementing key. You figure it out, LabKey. You figure out the key. That's what I'm saying. So I'll do that. Now it'll save successfully. And it'll import the data. So here we go. We got our first list. It's not yet surfaced on our tab. So if I go back to my cell culture tab, this is all just happening internally. If I go back to cell culture tab, I just get emptiness. Let's surface that list. Let's use a good old list single web part. And did I answer that question? There was a question here about sort of how Excel formatting issues. Yeah, Excel has a lot of formatting issues. How are these handled during the upload to LabKey, such as date formats, etc.? Let me go back a little bit and just look at that. Well, first of all, let's add this list to our tab. Let's add the cell culture list. Let's just briefly go back. So here it is. We got our first thing is happening. We've imported a list and we've surfaced it on a tab. Great. Let's go back to the designer briefly and sort of talk about validation and stuff. Notice these fields, there's a lot of richness. The fields here can actually open up and you can get a lot of richness in here. So like if I open up the pH field, there's some sub things I can do here. Like I can add formatting or I can do a range validator. I can say I can only want, like that would be a natural thing for pH. Like can't really have negative pH value. And does pH ever go beyond 14? I don't know. I always think of pH as something that happens between like 1 and 14. So I could add that as a range validator, it's called. I could say, don't only accept values between 1 and 14 or whatever you want. So notice there's a format area for numbers. So if I want to show 3 significant digits, I could say 1, 2, 3. If I want to show 4, I could do 4. I'll just do that to make the point. So this is sort of how you can do formatting. You can do similar things with dates and whatnot. So this is where I'm trying to answer you. Your formatting stuff, it all happens here inside the field designer. And sure enough, look at, there's my pH has now 4 significant digits. Notice the pH column's kind of ugly. It has like a capital P and a capital H. I didn't want that. I want that cool, like small lowercase p and that uppercase H. Let's go back to the designer. Let's refine that label. I want that. So what I do is I can label like the database wants to sort of get rid of lower cases and stuff and kind of reformats your name sometimes. So now I get that nice pH. So anyways, I got my first table. Here's the demo I'm trying to work through here. What have we done? We've started with the Excel file. We've inferred the fields. We've refined the fields. We've saved the design. We've imported the data. We've created a grid view. Great. Or surfaced a grid view. What about create a report? Let's actually create a report. I'm going to make a visualization. I'm going to go to the visualization area. Again, we'll do this on day 3, but just to give you a sense of it, I'm going to make a line chart. And I want to see those pH values change over the days. So day is on the x-axis, pH is on the y-axis. What do I got? Oh my God, I got a chart. Let's save it. Oh, we got to give it a name. pH over days. Great. There's another thing I can now serve. I can just like build a dashboard now. Let's surface that chart. It's called, I'm gonna use the report web part. It's right here. I can just click submit. Awesome. I've really got myself my first very fundamental data app. I've got a table and a visualization that is built on top of the table. This is like so LabKey. This is just, it's ugly. The chart's too big and whatnot, but it's a live chart. It's a live report. So if I like change this pH to 1, the chart will reflect that. You can see it does that. Let's change that back. So that was what I wanted to do for my deep dive into data grids. We'll go deeper with this, but I just wanted to give you a sense of sort of another kind of mode of building stuff with LabKey. So I got some questions here. Someone asks, are there folder contents? Are these folder contents also saved in the LabKey database? Yeah, they are. Kind of almost everything is saved in the LabKey database. Files are not. Like these files. Let's go here. The files actually are not part of the database. They're on the server, but they're just in a file directory. But in most cases, things are saved in the database. Was there any other questions there, Will? Some other questions here. Another one asks, can projects modules interact with LabKey? Oh, are they separate? Yes, they're separate. I think we answered those. Oh, here was one. One we wanted to ask was, in a table, is it possible to have a column where the values are unique? Yes, I believe so. It's a new feature. Let's go to the designer and look around. I'm going to go to the designer for cell culture. And is there a new data type called unique? Let's add a new field. I'm not seeing it, but I don't understand this feature yet. So I could be wrong. But I believe the answer is yes. I'll research that tonight. I think we've answered all these. If I'm missing something, ask again. Don't let me just ignore it. Okay, great. Well, I think we've answered all the current questions, and I think I'm ready to go to my third sort of agenda item for the day. But we've been going for like an hour and a half. Let's take a break and get to security. There's a final little advanced slide here. It's super important, but I don't want to overwhelm you. Let's take a 5-minute break though. Let's restart at 10:30. Right now it's 10:24. So let's take a 6-minute break, go get some coffee, and we will resume. All right, thanks everybody. All right, folks, we're going to start in about 1 minute. All right, well, let's get going here, heading into kind of the security part of the day. Although I did notice there's two questions I missed, and I wanted to at least talk to them about data grids. First, someone asks, what is the difference between list and assay? They seem kind of similar. There is a difference. Lists, again, are really just generic tables. They're kind of general purpose. They're sort of for, you don't know where the data goes, put it in a list. They're often also used for kind of utility purposes, like if you want a fixed list of values that you want to use somewhere else, you can put those in a list. Assays are really quite substantially different. An assay design, an assay table has kind of experiment concepts built into it. We haven't seen them yet. But for example, there's a concept of a run in an assay design. You know, a run is like a cycle of an experiment. And there's also a concept of a batch. So it's a way of grouping together a whole bunch of experiments, like you did a whole batch of experiments, a whole set of runs. So those are two concepts that are sort of inherent to assays. Those concepts are not part of lists. And there's also some built-in QC functionality inside of assays. You're able to say, for a given run, did this pass my QC standards or did it not? Or is it something else? Something in between. And so there's just a few examples of sort of some kind of domain-specific built-in functionality around assays. So there's lots more, and that's what tomorrow's all about. And then there's another question here. Should the user prepare data submission using Excel? We tried to type in the values directly into LabKey online. However, the UI is not easy. The user can't see all the data as in Excel, which makes it difficult to create IDs. Also, there's no drag and copy, or that cool drag down functionality in Excel. Absolutely. You're not the only one who noticed this. LabKey is not online Excel. Great data grids are not online Excel. They are really primarily data presentations on the web. They're not really optimized for like modifying, importing, updating data, things like that. Excel is way better at that. So absolutely, in fact, if we go back, we've actually provided for that in all of our tables. So if I go back to my cell culture table, and I want to import, say, some data. There's a couple of ways to do it. One way is to, like, if I do a row of data, I could just do it that way. That's one way I sort of get an online form to import one row of data. But if you kind of want to work with it as a grid, what you can do is go to the import bulk data, and you can literally kind of do a text grid in this box. But what I really want to do is show you this. You can actually get the template Excel file. I'm going to download it. There's this download template button. I'm going to download that. Now I have an empty Excel file that I can fill out. Give it a second to turn on here. And I can say, I'd say I'm doing a new experiment, and it's 2 days old, and the pH keeps dropping, and the sugar keeps dropping, but the viability goes up. Whatever. So I got a new experiment. I'm going to import it. I can now just import this. It's going to work because I know, because it's already, already in that format. So I can just go browse over to it. Select it. I imported it. Awesome. There it is. The new data. It's in there. And it kind of messed up my graph, but so that is an absolutely provided for import modality, is to just do all the good stuff, all the work in Excel, and then just throw the Excel file up at the grid. By the way, I should say though, inside of Sample Manager, the UI around working with data grids and updating data online is much more advanced and does feel more like Excel. You can do things like do drag downs and copy and paste and work with the grid that's online. It's really slick. It's really nice. I really recommend, if you want to do that, if you want to see more of that, there's a great video, number of videos that Hannah did, and you just can't avoid that UI. It's everywhere whenever you work with Sample Manager. So it's not always as kind of crude as it is in the server. Great. Well, let's move on to our security portion of the day. And if you have any other questions about grids and basics, don't hold back, though. We'll answer them. But for now, Obid on security. First thing to know about LabKey security: it's a role-based security system. By that, I mean users are given different powers over batches of data. In LabKey speak, they're given different roles over folders of data. And remember when I said folders were really important in security? This is why. It's because you give out roles on a folder by folder basis. The roles define what you can do to the data. Can you see it? Can you change it? Can you delete it? Can you submit it? Things like that. And so you can potentially have different roles, different powers in every given folder. And you can sort of, I think a good way to sort of get a sense of that is, I'm an admin. I'm sharing my screen as an admin. I'm showing you what an admin can see. So what can an admin see? He can see everything. He or she can see everything. I can see all these projects. It doesn't matter what, I can see it. But a real user is not going to be like that. They're going to see less. And you can actually, as an admin, I can actually impersonate another user. So you can actually do that through this button here. I'm going to go to this little head and shoulders icon. I'm going to go to impersonate, and I'm going to impersonate a user and sort of see it. What would that user see? And there's this, I don't know, I'll just take this test. There's this person named Test. I don't even know what that is. Let's just impersonate that person. What can that see? Well, Test can see a much restricted set of projects. Why? Because this user test2115, has the reader role in these folders only. The other folders, test2115, has no roles and has no way to interact with any of that stuff. They can't see it. They can't change it. They don't even know it's there. So that's why folders are so important in security. One of the reasons why folders are so important. Now I just stopped impersonating. I'm back to my admin self. I can see everything. Again, roles are powers. They're granted to an individual, like I just did, or showed, or to a group. We'll get into that. The roles are different levels of power, and the higher roles tend to include the lower roles. So if you're an editor, it's a relatively high role, relatively powerful role, then you're also a reader. They kind of telescope the lower roles. And if you're an admin, it's like getting all the roles. Some specialized roles are sort of outside the scale. Like there's a role called specimen coordinator, and they can sort of do some stuff with some specimen stuff. That's about it. It's kind of off to the side. And there's also like a role called QC analyst. And a QC analyst can change the QC state on assay runs, but not much else. They can kind of evaluate assay runs and say that's good or that's bad or that's not, or something else. But that's about it. And you can see these roles. Let's go. We took a hint. We just briefly looked at the permissions page. But let's go back to it. I'm going to go to the gear, folder permissions. This is kind of, as an admin, this is the second most important page you're going to go to, gear, folder permissions. You can see the roles right here. This list is a list of roles. And the first, there's the really important role here is project administrator. Then there's folder administrator. There's a subtle difference between the two, but don't worry about it right now. Third most powerful role on this list is editor. Notice there's an interesting role here, editor without delete. This is like a really powerful role, but they can't delete. And that's kind of a cool safety editor. It's like, yeah, okay, you can change stuff, but you can't just delete it. That's kind of somebody, actually a client asked for that directly and we just built it for them. And then there's, author and reader and some other roles. They kind of keep going. Then they get a little bit sort of specific, like assay designer. That's somebody who can design assays, but they can't import data and they can't do most anything else. It goes on and on. So that's the ladder of roles. This actually doesn't include every role. There's some super powerful roles that aren't here. They're so powerful, they don't want to just hand them out everywhere, and we'll get to that. There's the most powerful roles are the admin roles. And the most powerful of those is something called the site admin. The site administrator is like the god of the server. They can see and do everything. Nothing is denied them. Almost nothing is denied them. This is a very dangerous role. They can break stuff. You can delete stuff. You can do things that you didn't want to do by pressing too many buttons. It's not to be taken lightly. And this training is really about being a site admin, right? Like what it's powerful, but dangerous. And you can almost do everything. You can do 99.9% of everything, but there's actually one thing I know you can't do. If you are the last site admin on a server, you can't remove yourself from being a site admin. Now, you can demote yourself from site admin. Like I can do that as long as there's another site admin out there. And why can't I divide? If I'm the last site admin, why can't I demote myself? Because if you did, you'd never have another site admin. Because only another site admin can promote you to be a site admin. And a site administrator is one of those super powerful roles that has its own configuration area. And let's actually just go look at it. It's over here. If I go to gear, site permissions. There's actually a couple of places for it. There's site permissions, but let's go to site admins. There's actually a site admins page. This lists all the site admins. This is an insane number of site admins. You should never have these many site admins. These are just like everybody at LabKey who's ever worked as a site admin here. And it's just kind of because it's a sort of a sandbox server and you're never supposed to put anything super important on in this site. We allow this many site admins. But in the real world, in your world, you should never have this many site admins. Why? Because they make a mess of things. They can do too much. They can fight against each other. They can like delete each other's stuff and where'd my thing go and all that kind of stuff. And you can see what happens when you have that many site admins. Like you end up with this giant pile of folders and projects. And I did one thing and I forgot, like here's a repro somebody did years ago and never deleted it. It's just a giant mess. So don't do this, but just to give you a sense of it, this is where you would add a new site admin or demote yourself if you want to. There is a second most powerful role called the project admin, project or folder admin. And these are admins that have the same kind of power, but only in a narrow piece of real estate. A site admin has power over the whole globe of the server. The project admin has power over just one continent or one country. Groups are a way to pre-configure and standardize security. So basically, security is about giving power to the right people over the right folders. That's what security is. You're saying you user can see this folder, and this other user can be an editor in that folder. That's all security is just making those relationships. That can be really daunting if you've got thousands of users, hundreds of users, and you need to assign each user unique profile throughout the server. That's actually not very tenable. And it's really hard to even understand when you start just individually giving out roles to individuals. It quickly turns into a giant mess. What you really want to do at any scale is use groups to manage your security. And what you can do there is you pre-configure your security using groups. So you give roles to groups, and then you control the access by controlling the population of the groups. And for example, let's go to our site. Let's go to the app we're building, main project. Let's go to the security area. Right now, I've said that guests are readers. Guests are like a pre-built group. And the guests are the group that's just everybody in the world. But suppose I wanted a more kind of a bespoke thing. Like I wanted to make a group. I could do that. There's a tab here for groups, project groups. I'm going to create a group. Oops, I got to give it a name. Let's call it the main project. Let's call it let's call it the Lab A group. Just some group. Now, I've got a group I can give powers to. And I can say, I want Lab A to be right here. Lab A group is now readers in this project. Now, interestingly, nothing's happened yet. Like, that's just me saying that a group has a power. A group has a role. Thing is, there's nobody in this group yet. Let's go open this group. Now is where I want to add users to it. So I could do that one by one. I could say Adam Rauch is in that group, and Matt Ballou is in that group, and Hannah is in that group. So now what I've done is I've said the reader power is given to Lab Group A, and that Lab Group A consists of Adam, Hannah, and Matt. So I've got my first sort of group-based security thing. Groups can also be part of groups. So if I wanted to make sort of reconfigure this the way I had it before so that the general public can see this, I could do it a couple of ways. I could make the general public part of lab group A and say the guests, oh, I can't add the groups. I'm sorry, I can't add the guests there. But to do that, what I would have to do is add guests here, back here. So now I'm saying two groups have access. Lab group A and guests. In any case, that's what I'm trying to get across here is groups are really the only way to handle security at any scale. More than a dozen users, you want to use groups. And we use them constantly inside. You know, we have got, what, hundreds of clients and dozens of people for each client, and you got to use groups to handle it. Some built-in groups. There's three really important built-in groups. There's something called guests. We've looked at that. That's just anonymous users. Anybody with a web browser is a guest. There's another group called all site users. These are all of the users who have accounts and passwords on a server. So anybody who can sign in is part of all site users. I should put it this way. It's a little more subtle than that. Anybody who has signed in, is currently signed in, is part of all site users. And then each project actually comes with its own built-in group just called users. And that's actually probably what I should have used when I built lab group A. I probably just should have reused the pre-built group called users. Anyways, if you use these three groups, you can pretty much handle 80, 90% of your security needs, I think. So users, groups, and roles, they sort of create kind of a pathway. And there's one way to think about it. They create a pathway to a resource. So if I'm a user, Steve, and I'm part of group 2, and group 2 has editor role over project A, what does that mean? All that, to summarize it, it means Steve's an editor in project A. And Avital, because she's part of group 4 and group 4 has the submitter role, what does that all mean? Avital is a submitter on project B. I see a question here. And that's an Excel. I'm going to answer that later. Inheritance, another thing. Okay, this is one of those, remember one that I said earlier, one of the basic patterns in LabKey is this cascading or inheritance type of behavior or pattern. This really surfaces in security. What I'm saying here is when you create a security configuration at the project level, it automatically is applied or is inherited at the subfolder level. Let's make a subfolder to get a sense of that. I'm going to go, let's save this. Let's save that, but let's look at it. Let's remember, what does our brain say? It says Steve's a project admin, and the readers are guests. Lab group A and guests are readers. That's the security config. Let's make a new subfolder and see what happens. I'm going to make a new subfolder. Notice there's a little subfolder button. And I'm going to call this, I don't know, it's called subfolder A. And I'm going to just make it another collaboration folder. Great. And I'm just going to take all the defaults, yada, yada, yada. Great. Now notice I've got a main project and a subfolder. And I get all the default web parts for the subfolder. Let's ignore that for now. Let's go to the security area. Does subfolder A have any security already set up? It does. Let's go to folder permissions. Lo and behold, the inheritance is clicked. Inheritance permissions from parent. What that means is use the same permissions that you got from the project. And that's what's happening here. I've just cloned the permissions. Now, I don't need to clone the permissions. I could turn this off and say, you know what? I don't want guests to see this folder. Just want lab A. That's what I'm going to do. That just the lesson there is by default, subfolders clone the security of the parent. So be aware of that. Like, don't just make a subfolder and put stuff in it because you might be exposing things you don't want to expose. Always look at this. Whenever you create a subfolder, go look at the security and say, like, does this make sense for this new data area I'm building? And the other lesson is you can turn it off if you want. You can kind of have independently secured folders. Even though these folders are sort of related, there's like a parent and a child folder, they can have totally independent security. In fact, you can have like subfolder A can be more open to the world than main project. There's no pattern necessary there. Like, one doesn't need to be more open or less open than the other. They can sort of be totally independent. So there's lots of different security configurations possible. And here's a nice summary that Susan Hurt built a few years ago, and I just stole it from her. She built it in 2018. I've always liked this slide, so I stole it from her. She sort of divides the different access possibilities into 4 types: public, controlled public, institutional, and elite. Public means you've given access to guests. We've already done that. We took it away, but we did that. Controlled public means you're giving access to people that are signed in, and especially when self-sign-up is enabled. We haven't talked about this, but there are 2 ways to kind of set up user registration for a site. You can have sort of invite-only registration, where like you're a site admin and you have to actually send somebody an email and say, hey, you're allowed to make an account on the site. Or you can make it more open and say, you can turn on something called self-sign-up or self-registration. That's where you can just come across a site and click the right links and get yourself an account on the website. So that's controlled public access. That kind of the third level might be, we'll call it institutional. And that's where you enable authentication based on something, say like LDAP or single sign-on or something like that. This is where like you have dozens or hundreds or more people to kind of sign up to the server, but there's already some authentication resources at play and you just want to reuse those. And then elite is like the highest level of access. That's like really like when you're just going to hand out data to just like half a dozen people. You've got another PI you want to show something to. You've got whatever, the Nobel Committee that you want to show your data to. Like, this is like, this is not public stuff. And this is kind of just some nice categories to keep in mind. There's really dozens of spots on this slope, but there's 4 kind of important ones. Testing security. We've seen a little bit about impersonation. Like, you can see this server from other people's eyes. It's the great tool for trying to decide whether you've got your security set up right. I really, really encourage you to use impersonation. Like, you're trying to figure out if people are seeing the right things and if there's any leaks that you don't want to expose. Use impersonation. Go and look at the site from that user's point of view and see if it's reasonable. Interestingly, you can also impersonate groups and roles. But interestingly, you actually can't impersonate the guest group. It's just not possible. So how do you do that? Well, what you do is you can log out and look at the site. That can be a little inconvenient, though, because then you're going to have to log back in. Actually, I think the best way to kind of impersonate the guests, or to approximate impersonating the guests, is to just open another website another kind of web browser that you never use. Like I never use Firefox very much, but I have it just for this purpose. So I open up Firefox. Let's get this. Let's get that site set up. Let's open up Firefox and go to this URL and see what I can see. Great. So let's go to Learn LabKey and stay not signing. I can't see anything. Interesting thing. It's what I've learned here. Learn LabKey requires me to sign in. Notice it does have self-registration on it. So that's kind of interesting. I should take it back. Actually, take it back. Only the home page is requiring me to sign in. So actually, I take it back. I think main project is still open to guests, if I remember. So let's see what happens when I go to main project on Firefox. Sure enough. Okay, so I can see it. That's what I expected. Why can I see it? Because it has guest access enabled. It has, why? Because the guests have the reader role in this project, in main project. In fact, there's a number of projects that have reader role, and you can see them right here. What is this? What is this telling me? This drop down is telling me all of these projects have guest access enabled. Home isn't one of them, notice. Home project's not one of them. That's why you see this when you go to home. Of course, it's asking you for a login. Okay. We're gonna say a little bit more about this, but there's, I'm just kind of giving you what I've just given you is kind of the ultra basics of security. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot of subtleties to it. And one of the ways that you can kind of go to more advanced security is to look at sort of the security features. The compliance features in LabKey. There's a premium edition feature, but you can do things like require users to sign a terms of use. You can also have special handling for protected health information. So if you have, say, a field that's like, God forbid, a social security number or disease diagnosis, something sensitive, something you don't want to just give out, you can hide that field from users using the compliance features. And you can do all kinds of sort of fancier things like set login limit attempts, and do also other kinds of like de-identifying things like shift dates, create alternative IDs, mask things like clinic names from being shown. Why mask clinic names? Well, it's actually can be very revealing. Imagine, you've got a data grid and one of the items is like, one of the clinic names is something like the Brooklyn, women's health clinic. Well, there's sort of that's kind of a lot of information. Like you may not want to show that. You might want to mask that. So PHI gives you a way to do that. The compliance features give you a way to do that. I think I've talked about that a little bit. Again, I think I've talked about this, but just to kind of review, like, how do you set up security? First of all, navigate to the project or folder that you want to secure. Create the appropriate groups. Assign roles to those groups. Test. You can already test it. You don't need to actually give out you haven't given out any power yet to any actual user, but you've got something you can test because you've used groups. Now once you like it, now you can start adding people to the groups. You can start populating the groups, and that's the way to handle This is the basic workflow for setting up security for a folder. So some best practices around security, like always ask, like, what are you trying to do? And what are the data audience relationships you're trying to establish? Are you trying to just show people things? Are you trying to allow editing of things? Are you trying to what? Also, like, are you trying to show too much? Is it like, you got to ask these kind of questions. In general, I've already said this, but only allow a few site admins. Keep it simple. Lots of groups and groups within groups can have lots of unintended consequences and be really complex. In general, avoid assigning roles to individuals. There are some examples. There are some exceptions. Site admins are almost always assigned individually. And then things like kind of special access or transient access you can often want to just do individual role assignment. Like if you have that PI that you just wanted to see that data for the afternoon, you can just assign that role, that reader role for the afternoon and take it away later. And also don't think that I think sometimes it's really easy to imagine that the projects are more public and the subfolders are more private. It's actually often the reverse. Often the subfolders are more public and the parents are more private. It's just that sort of, you'll see that LabKey's kind of architecture tends to drive you to that pattern. More public subfolders, more private projects. I think I've already really demoed this. How do you set up public access? You assign the guest role to the readers. Sorry, you assign the reader role to the guests. I see a question here. Is there a reader role that allows the user to only view and not download data? Actually, no, there isn't. We really don't separate that out. You can, however, make it more inconvenient to download data. You can turn off that, you can sort of take away that download button. There's actually a way to do that. But if they're smart enough, they'll still be able to download it. Why? Well, think about it this way. Like, why don't we separate that out? Because it's a little bit of a false promise. If you can see it, you can always take a screenshot of it, right? Like, if you can see the data grid, you can get it. So we're a little bit like, why give a false impression that you can't download the data? If you can see the data, you can always download it, no matter what we do. Good question, though. How to set up control public access. I think, well, I'll show this. Why not? It's easy. Let's go to main project. Right now, it has guest access. I'm going to restrict it, and I'm going to say, no, you have to have a login to see it. That means I'm going to take away this, and I'm going to take away this. I don't want Lab A to see this anymore. What I want is all site users. So what I'm saying here is anybody who's logged in can now see this project. And let's test that with Firefox. Let's make sure it disappeared from Firefox. There it is. You don't see it, but the URL says Learn LabKey main project. Now, if I try to go to that, let's just really try to go to that. I'll show you that. I'm going to try to go. That's the URL, right? Nope, it won't let me in anymore because I made it controlled public access. I wanted to sort of end today with sort of a couple of sort of things. Like, first of all, I want to return to this idea of scoped data. I've mentioned this before, but I want to kind of keep coming back to it. It's a concept that's not always easy to get. LabKey I'll say it again. When you configure things at the project level, they tend to cascade down into the subfolders. They tend to be available in subfolders. So let's go to our subfolder right here called subfolder A. And remember that list I made called cell culture list? It's actually available here, even though I'm one subfolder down. Let's first of all, let's get rid of this stuff. I don't want you or you or you or you, but I do want that table, which is available. Sure enough, it's, wait, where are you? What did I do wrong? Let me go to my query browser. Surprise. What did I do wrong? Is my security doing them to me? Let me. Demo's kind of messed up. I mean, give me a minute here to think about this. Go back up to main project here. There's a list. Let's go to the design. It looks fine to me. Oh, is this why? Here, let's try this. Sorry, I didn't expect this. I am going to reset my permissions to be inherit permissions from the parent. Let's save that. Let's see if that makes the list available. Well, it's not. I don't know. I screwed something up. I did something wrong. So let's not do this demo. I'll do it tomorrow. It's kind of a complicated demo anyways. Let's skip to the real final slide, which is kind of options for getting started. Like, you've learned a lot today, but like now what can I do to kind of keep going? And one great resource is get a trial server. So what you can do is go to LabKey to get a trial server. If you don't have a trial right now, and if you've got access to a server, go and get your administrator to like give you a project to play with. But if you don't have a server at all, you're like a new user, you're new to LabKey, go get a trial server. And what you can do is go to labkey.com, click request a demo, and we'll set you up with a trial server. Another great way to get started, although it's a little bit, you need to be a little bit more savvy and technically adept, is to install the community edition. Like, you need to install Tomcat and Java and a database, but if you know what all that means, you should install the community edition and get going with it. And then there's some other ways to get access to a server, like, ask your admin and stuff. So anyway, so just some ideas for you to get started. And also, I think another great option is to get started with the tutorials. So right here, there's on the main docs page, on the main tutorial page, you can see there's all of these different sort of step-by-step tutorials. Like, there's a list tutorial, which I basically went through the list tutorial today. There's a security tutorial. I kind of did that already, but there's there's this file repository tutorial. There's this collaboration tutorial. There's study related tutorials, etc. Assay tutorials. We're going to kind of do this tutorial tomorrow live, etc. Anyway, so that's another great place to get started. that's really all I wanted to do today. Let's kind of make the rest of this Q&A. And I see there may be some other questions here. Yeah, so anyways, I don't actually know any questions yet, but let's give you folks a moment. Any thoughts or questions to end the day here? You're cogitating a bit. Oh, here we go. Can you link different data grids by a common sample ID? I think if I understand your question, yes, you can. And so if you say, I think there's a couple of ways to understand this. Like an FMP, I don't know FMP. Feel free to say a little bit more about what you're thinking here. But yeah, I don't know that. I don't know FileMaker Pro. But if you mean something like if you have two tables and they have a common column like sample ID, you can absolutely link those. You could do that in a number of ways. You could use a query. If you're in a study, that you could do it graphically. And the user now says some more bit detail here. So I have freezer samples in one table and assays in another table. Absolutely yes. So the answer is absolutely yes. You could do this with a query. You know what's the best way to do it though? Is with a lookup. And now that you're here, and now that we just did a thing on the grids, let's just see what a lookup can do. I'm going to go to this table basics demonstration and this demographics table. This is really interesting. This table is actually doing just what you want. It's actually a hybrid table between demographics and another table called languages. The languages table is over here. So there's actually a lookup that goes, there's a link between demographics, this, and languages, this. And I've surfaced the languages table right here. It's in this column, English, German, Spanish, French. So what I'm saying is I've got all this data about languages and I want to surface it in this demographics grid. Once I've made that link, actually, I can even pull in other columns from the languages table. So let's look at the languages table for a minute. There's a translator name and a translator phone column. It'd be kind of cool to see those surfaced here in demographics. So I can actually do that by, let's get in the right spot. There's a little grid customizer. And I can go and select other columns to display, to surface here. And notice there's a language node. It's actually a node. I can open this language up and notice it says language, translator name, translator phone. So cool. And I can now surface those in the demographics grid. And sure enough, there they are. So I now have kind of a hybrid table. And you could do the very same thing with your freezer samples and your assay samples. Kind of get them together in one grid just the way I've done it here. It's a great question. There's a number of ways to do it. Lookups, this lookup column is the easiest way to do it. Other questions out there? We're thinking, let's do a little preview of tomorrow. We're going to look at the assay framework in LabKey. We're going to re-import my data, my cell culture data, and do it inside an assay design. It's going to be way better. We're just going to make more of the data. We imported it as a list today. That's not optimal. You can do better. Then we're also going to take a look at data structures. And by data structures, I mean lists, data sets, assay design, sample types, and data classes. We're going to do a deep dive on these and kind of what that means. It means a lot. And then I'm probably going to do, maybe if we have time, we'll do some sort of advanced data structure stuff. So anyways, that's kind of where that's for tomorrow. And there might be I might think of something else as well to do tomorrow, if I'm inspired. Other questions out there? All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. That was, I know that was a lot. It's like 2.5 hours of, oh, here we go. Got another question. Definitely hope there's time for the advanced data structures. Yeah, I hope so too. And if not, you at least give me the slides. Great. All right. Well, thanks everybody. That was tour de force today, and thanks for sticking with me. And we'll see you tomorrow. All right, signing off. Have a good day, everybody.